everyone, happy Thursday. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live. My name is Catherine and I'm the Director for the Business of Data team here at Corinium. As part of our Business of Data podcast, we intend to live stream each episode ahead of hosting it on the BOD platform, and of course all of the wonderful podcast providers like Apple, Google and Spotify as well. We would love to hear your thoughts, comments and questions, so please feel free to share those in the comments section. Now, if you would like to appear as a guest on our podcast, please do reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. But for now, let's dive into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the Business of Data podcast. My name is Catherine King and I'll be your host. Welcome to season 3. It's absolutely lovely to have you joining us. In this series, we will be talking to executives and thought leaders from a range of industries, departments and functions, all about their passions, experiences and challenges within data and analytics. Let's go ahead and dive straight into today's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Business of Data podcast. This week we are chatting all about the changing online landscape, specifically how companies need to adapt to changing times with regards to customer relationships, analytics and privacy. Now, to do just this, we have brought in a wonderful guest who is an expert in this area. Of course, I'm talking about Thanasis Thermopoulos, who is the head of global marketing and commercial analytics for eBay. Now, if you haven't had the pleasure of meeting him, just a few intro facts before we get going. Now, Thanasis is dialing in from Amsterdam today. However, previously he has lived and worked in France as well. I always love that increasingly my guests on the Bob Pod are well travelled and have lived many places, which always adds in a really nice element to these conversations. I digress. Now, Thanasis, as I say, is currently eBay's head of global marketing and commercial analytics team, but prior to that has worked in a number of well-known brands, including Google. Now, if you can't find him at his work desk, you'll most likely find him spending time with his young family, or perhaps even playing a musical instrument, most likely the piano. Brilliant to have you on joining us today.
Thank you, Catherine.
Now, as is the Bog Pod tradition, I start out with a nosy question. Now, I know that in addition to the piano, you play a couple other instruments as well, don't you? You play was it the oud you said you played?
Yes, that's true. I play a few more, and I play the oud as well. Yes, we call this the outi in Greece, but it's the oud. Yes, it's a string instrument that's being played around the Mediterranean in general.
Oh, wonderful. Have you had more time to play in recent months and almost a year now, given everything that's gone on? Have you been able to practice a bit more?
I'm afraid a bit less. That's what
a bit less
when you have a little family, so you have a bit less time for yourself. So you need to do several things, right? Jobs and your home job as well. So I'll keep it for later.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, apart from being an incredibly nosy person that I am, the reason I often ask these questions is because I really think that people's personal lives really influence them as a leader and how they approach their career. So I'm going to kind of blend that into the discussion as we go, because I'd imagine as a musician, you're a rather creative person, which I think lends itself very, very well to marketing and advertisement as well. So we'll see how those thread together. Now, let's set the scene a little. I know in your role you recently expanded into being more broad than it was previously. So I wondered if you could begin by outlining your role and what it is you look after within eBay.
Sure. Yes. So I joined the eBay Classifieds group. So we are the part of eBay that takes care of all the classified websites. And I started April the 1st, so in the middle of the first lockdown, as the head of the global commercial analytics team. So that encompasses mostly advertising revenue, which is a big chunk of the revenue, obviously. And since a few weeks, I've been also running the global marketing analytics team. So that's, let's say, a parallel team that also takes care of the analytics centrally, but more on the marketing side. So that also encompasses a lot of domain, but it's more marketing. So it's of course everything around digital activities, paid digital activities, CRM, but also customer satisfaction and many other topics.
Super. I think it's going to be really interesting for the audience members who perhaps sit in one of those teams to hear from you, and the fact that you are looking over both now in various companies that we see. We have listeners from lots of different size companies and organizations, so it'd be really great to hear for them your perspectives. Now, as I said at the top of this conversation, we're talking all about the changing landscape of the online world, especially in the realm of advertising and marketing, as you say. So let's start off quite broad. Could you summarize the big changes that you're currently working through and the changes that you see on the horizon for this world?
Yeah, so obviously there's a huge shift now in the way that, let's say, users go online and what they expect in terms of privacy.
Mm-hmm.
So this started already, 2 years back, I would say, with the famous GDPR, as we know in Europe mostly, but also e-privacy and other changes as well. So there are quite a few impacts there, obviously major ones. The first one being that it's becoming more and more difficult to recognize people online. And what does this has in terms of second wave of impact is that if you can't really recognize people online, then you will more, let's say, have more challenges in providing personalized experiences, and also be able to measure whatever you're doing online as online activities, and to measure it. So the promise that we had in the past was a one-to-one personalization at scale. And so everybody was really trying very hard with very advanced models to be able to identify each unique person across devices, across browsers, which was already kind of a little challenge. But in order to be able to do very specific micro-targeting, and also being able to measure individually all the actions you would well. This promise is a promise from the past. So before we even managed to actually roll out this fully, it's something that now is much more shifting into what I call not a one-to-one, but a one-to-few. And why would we do this? Because there's been an increasing, let's say, focus on privacy. So the awareness around not only the quantity and the type of data that companies, corporations collect about individuals, but also the fact that they used to do this a lot without people knowing. So people realize that, right? And now, thanks to the awareness, thanks also to legislation, individuals have more power and more control on what they give in terms of information and to whom.
Yeah.
So this ranges, of course. So there's a very vast, let's say, a range of things there. So it comes from really like, are you allowed to follow me at all? So this is everything around cookies, I guess I will talk about later, but also a bit later what type of data. So these days that we're talking now, one of the major messaging software is changing their terms and conditions, and collecting and combining much more data than before. And I think this is something that's very interesting, because it's a bit the opposite of what everybody's doing, and I'm very curious to see how the consumers will react to that.
Absolutely. Now, it's so funny, and I hope the audience members do it as well, that when you're talking through things and you're hearing them, you're applying them to your own business or your own life. And when we were preparing for this episode, something actually happened in my personal life, and I thought, this is the kind of challenge that I think you're experiencing. So I follow a small business on social media. They're absolutely fantastic, and regularly they do live streams on Facebook, and there's quite it's almost a bit culty. There's quite a big community that follow them, and there's a few key names that well, that's so and so from this anyway. And they decided to move their live streaming away from Facebook because they were finding they couldn't keep up with the comments fast enough. There was kind of a time lapse, and they moved on to another platform. Now, when they moved, you couldn't just put your username as Catherine King. It had to be C King 2008 or something like that. And suddenly there was that kind of anonymity behind it. And people were commenting just as they were, but they weren't able to interact in that same way because you no longer knew who these people were. And it's very similar, I think, from what you were saying then. It made me think on it when I was seeing it happen. that suddenly that you weren't able to personalize. They weren't able to make the jokes at the comments because they didn't know who those people were anymore and whether it would be relevant to them. And it made me think on this conversation here actually, and how you have the same people engaging, but you may not be able to identify them. And it made me think of that, and I thought it was an interesting point to make. So I encourage all the audience members, when you're listening to these podcasts, to think about your own organizations and the challenges you'll be going through. Now, you mentioned GDPR, the dreaded GDPR, as for some, easier for others. Now, since it came into force, there's been an increased public awareness to data and data privacy as well. How have you seen this impacting on opting in and consenting to sharing data at eBay?
So GDPR is already something that's been enforced for some time. So companies have been able to get prepared to try things and to comply, right? So with in general, so there are many parts in the GDPR, and we're not here to go in detail in everything, but let's say one of the big part is asking for people's choice, right, or consent on what they are willing to give, but there are many other things such as privacy by design, or the ability, the right to be forgotten, or this kind of thing. So that's more on the internal processes of the companies. So all this is, I think, something that's very well mastered today. The two challenges that are more current, let's say, are around e-privacy, for around, so everything is what we call the cookieless world, right? So in a few months from now, the world will be cookieless. So that's very different from what we knew, because for the past, I don't know how old the internet is in your view, but let's say we could say 20 years, maybe a bit more. This is the main way to recognize people across websites, to pass information on users, etc. So, but this is also, so there are some cookies that are very useful, right? So they help you to be recognized when you log into a website, because you don't every time to type in your username and a password. They also remember your preferences. They have the website to function, so they maybe also manage your cart, for instance, or your shopping cart. But what you've seen in terms of let's say percentages and big trend is that now the cookies that are the mostly used are advertising cookies, and also what we call cross-site cookies. So cookies that are there to pass information between different websites so that we can recognize the customer's journey. And this sometimes has a good intent, but sometimes is a bit overwhelming, right? And so information is shared very widely. So this is something that's going to be disappearing progressively. And frankly, not everyone has all answers to how we're going to be able to function after that. The second one is something that's much more specific to Apple with iOS 14 and so what they call the app transparency framework, transparency framework, where in their own way they will let's say give a very obvious and vocal choice to the user on whether they are willing to share their identifier for advertising. So obviously we've been preparing for this at eBay Classifieds Group, and we've run a few tests. Well, I can't share all the numbers, of course, but what we can see is that there's a sizable chunk of people who will decline, let's say, consent, as previously we could recognize them and provide them a personalized experience. So this is a challenge. On the advertising side, of course, it's a challenge for all publishers. It's a challenge. So the few ways, let's say, to work on this is a lot of, I think, explanation, right? So tell the users why it's probably a good thing. So when we were preparing, I also told you that famous sentence that it's not that people hate ads, it's that people hate ads. So I think from the moment where I will start to be targeted with things that are absolutely not relevant to me, it will become annoying, right? So this is one, but also having more and more, not only consenting users, but logged in users. Because when you have users that are logged in, it means generally that they accept to share, let's say, something about their profile, but also their history, their preferences, because it's just more convenient, more relevant, as you just get a better experience. But in order to do that, what you need to do is build trust. So if I'm a shady website or a website that is well known for, let's say, having uh, subpar practices around their information sharing,
Hmm.
then I will be very reluctant to that. If it's on the side of business that I trust, that I love, and that I'm totally okay with giving some of my data to in exchange for a better experience, I will do this very gladly.
Absolutely, and I think that that's kind of a key word, isn't it? Is that exchange? You've got to really see that value in what you're going to get to give back that value of your data as well. And that exchange, I think, it isn't a permanent thing as well. And I think that's quite interesting, actually, how something that was relevant perhaps isn't anymore as well. Now, as you say, the issue of it being unknown is very prominent, and the fact that people are preparing in many different ways. But how will you be preparing for kind of the uncertainty that is currently provided by the landscape of marketing and advertisement?
So it varies per country. We are currently present in 11 countries with 13 markets. The two big things is a bit what I told you about logged in users. So it's what we call
Mm.
first party data. So first party data is the data you have about your users and that other people don't have, right? So something more. So for instance, purchase history, this is a first party data, as opposed to third party data that would be, for instance, if I ask Google or Facebook to help me target people who like jazz, then they can give this to me, and everybody knows that those users like jazz. So so this is one of the first things, right? It's developing first party capabilities. So meaning not only collecting data, of course, in a compliant way and with the consent of the users, but also being able to use it. So
Mm-hmm.
once you've collected, once you know that this user has sold this item or has purchased this item, etc., or more stuff, what do you do with it? Um, and it's not so easy, right? So the MarTech and the AdTech environments are things that have been built in like across all those years and decades. So you need to somehow replicate part of this, and it's what, for instance, the major media sites have been doing, but also e-commerce and retail websites are increasingly focusing on that. So this is
Absolutely.
the first one, and second is being able to, let's say, test. So it's something we do a lot, especially in the analytics community, right? It's A/B testing,
Mm.
it's MBT, so it's basically testing all the time, which is something that the digital allows us to do. It's testing at scale and to see, okay, what kind of messaging works well, how do customers respond to, let's say, this kind of could be this kind of banner, this kind of copy, this kind of image, and trying to see how we can at the same time be, let's say, the most efficient, but also be the most informative for our users and helpful
Yeah.
for them.
Absolutely. Now, we mentioned earlier about the kind of public awareness, and we can all name different scandals that have happened where privacy has not been adhered to in issues like that. And there's from my experience speaking to many executives, there's quite a range of understanding truly what GDPR means and different privacy. And again, as you say, with everything that's going on with the cookies, there's quite a lot of unknown. Do you think in the wider industry, there's now a lack of creativity for fear of misstepping in these areas, or is it something that you think the industry's got a good handle on and can continue to be creative within the realm of this privacy I want to say privacy issue, but it's not necessarily an issue, it's privacy topic?
Yes, it's not an issue. Definitely, it's a change, right? So
Mm.
I think it's for the good, like for the users.
Yeah.
It's just that it's a challenge for the businesses. So it's a very interesting question that you're asking because what you see that there is no one single truth, right? Even with
Mm.
law and regulations, and so if you talk to different legal people or lawyers, there is a part for interpretation, which also is increased when you work across different markets
Yeah.
geographically. Because you also I must not forget that when you work with countries that are outside Europe, then they don't have the GDPR, but still their users, if it happens that a user comes from Europe, then they should be able to apply the GDPR regulations, because it applies to the users, not to the company. And by the way, in the US, they don't have GDPR, but they have a CCPA, and they will
Yeah.
soon have many more. We'll see if it will get harmonized or not. We don't know yet very well. So I think it's true that maybe several companies now are maybe trying to focus more on being compliant and maybe even you could say avoid fines, which I think is great, right? It is the purpose of setting up high fines, is that people comply to avoid those fines. And maybe the effort is now a bit more on this side rather than being more creative and finding a way to do that. But at the same time, you need to, because so we come from a situation A, which is complex, but there are talents that in the industry that understand this very well, to a situation B that nobody knows exactly. So Google is working on this privacy sandbox, while others are working on other things. Common IDs are being, let's say, explored. But what's sure is that nobody knows exactly what will be happening in 1 or 2 years from now. So at the same time, you need to be careful, but at the same time, you need to be creative to invent a new way that the internet will work, that marketing will work, that advertising will work online, etc. Because one thing that's for sure is that advertising is not going away. Right? It's one of the main revenue for many businesses, so it's something that's important.
Absolutely. Being carefully creative. I love that. And I think it's fair to say that if anyone in the audience is looking for a career that definitely provides lots of changes and twists in the journey, then this one is certainly on the top of the list for a landscape that's ever changing and constantly will. So towards the end of this discussion, let's move towards the future. I'd love to know what is next in your analytics journey.
The analytics journey. Well, that's an interesting one. So I think it's always the same, right? So online provides you huge opportunities. So that's scale, that's speed, that's access to markets, that's the ability to change, to iterate very fast, to test, etc. And at the same time, it's a huge world of if not anonymity, at least not knowing your consumers very well. So I think the challenge is doing this, is knowing your consumers and your users better and better, which, as we have been discussing, is going to be more and more difficult. So that's the interesting part. So the topic that go around this is, of course, everything around personalization, personalized advertising, personalized experience without cookies, but also things such as attribution. So attribution in the past was already a topic that was difficult. So to understand exactly where you should put your next dollar or remove your previous dollar in order, because this is helpful, this is incremental, this is not incremental, etc. There is overlap, there's waste. So attribution is a big topic, and also customer journeys, right? So if a customer buys something from you, how did it all start, and what helped, and how much, and in what way? So these are things that are very interesting, because they imply again collecting and collating data to have consistent, but also having models that helps you analyze this, because obviously you can't do this at scale. Let's say capabilities, and this involves machine learning. This involves very interesting, and also a lot of, let's say, storage, something that people tend to forget. And storage means costs, means SLAs, means lots of things. So if you want to have let's say an infrastructure that allows you to collect data, understand what your consumers do this at scale, do this real time or near real time. It's a whole infrastructure that I would, let's say, probably put somewhere online, obviously, and run advanced models online as well, and have this integrated chain of identifier events and data, ultimately to take the good actions, not only insights to understand, but also immediate actions, right? So providing personalized experience, providing all the let's say all the events we know online that will be more and more difficult to create. Also, being able to do this on browsers, being able to do this
Yeah.
on apps is also one of the next challenges. So as you can see, yeah, we're not lacking challenges, um,
Absolutely.
but we are tackling them. Looking forward to tackling them.
Absolutely. Well, it's always good to know your challenges, because a lot of people are now experiencing so much of the unknown that they're not sure where to start. But it's always good to know the challenges and the barriers that you've got to break down as well. Now, my last question, which I'm often told my final question is often the hardest to answer, just to preface that one with it, was if you could go back, say 5 years or so, and give yourself one piece of advice, whether professionally or personally, what would that be?
5 years from now, so personally, that would be play your instruments now because later it will be more difficult. Travel the world because there's a pandemic coming up. But professionally, I think it would be really doing this, building trust already, because everything is going to change, and the companies that will, let's say, win are the ones that will be prepared to have a unique relationship with their users, and be able to have, let's say, solutions that answer the business challenges, but also the concerns of your users.
Absolutely brilliant. And I will just say, I think if future you came back and said, by the way, there's a global pandemic coming up, I'm not sure past you would have believed it, because it's been a bit of a crazy time, hasn't it? But a really great answer there. Thank you so much for joining me on the Bob Pod. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
It was very nice as well. Thank you very much, Catherine.
What a brilliant conversation. I think for me, the most striking takeaway I can really bring from that chat was the constant balancing act that this department are having to do at the moment. So whether that's privacy versus personalization or creativity versus allowance, really very interesting stuff. And certainly, as I said during the episode, it's a landscape that is constantly changing and very exciting to keep our eyes on. Now, as always, make sure you are subscribed to the Business of Data platform for all of our content, as well as following us on socials to allow you to connect with other thought leaders just like yourselves. For now, stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you next time.